Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am really excited to be joined by Natalie Packer. Natalie is an independent education consultant specialising in SEND and school improvement. She develops and delivers a wide range of training and support, including SEND reviews to schools and multi-academy trusts. She works closely with several trusts to support their strategic development of SEND and is trustee of Learn AT in Leicestershire. She is an associate for the national organisations Nasen, Whole Education, Forum Strategy and Leadership Matters. Natalie regularly writes online articles for Optimus and The Key for school leaders and is author of The Perfect Senko and The Teacher's Guide to SEN. I probably need to own up to something here to my listeners so they get the context about sort of my excitement about having Natalie on here. So I met Natalie last year in person at the wonderful Nasen Awards, and I'm actually quite a big fan of Natalie and her work. And after a couple of glasses of wine, I managed to sort of build up the courage, didn't I, Natalie, to come over to you and say hello. And then in my head, I was going to be really, really cool and like say, hi, I'm Georgina, but I didn't. Instead, I sort of fangirled her and just told her she was SEND royalty, which she is, which is true. But yeah, sorry about that, Natalie.
I'm not sure about the royalty, but that's it's very nice of you to say so, Georgina. Thank you.
No worries. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and in particular why you're so passionate about supporting children and young people with SEND?
Yeah, certainly. So, well, I suppose it all started when I did a psychology degree quite a long time ago now. And at that point, my thoughts were really to go down the educational psychology route. But I never did that in the end. But I certainly sort of had that interest in special needs right from that point. So then when I started my teaching career, I'd only been teaching a couple of years when just lucky enough really that the opportunity came up for me to become a Senko in the primary school that I was working at the time. And it just really kind of spiraled from there. So after sort of doing the role of Senko in a couple of schools and doing a couple of sort of leadership roles in school, I then started working with local authorities. And so I was SEN advisor in a couple of local authorities in the East Midlands. And then also did an acting headship in a primary school as well for a short while. And then went to work with the DFE as part of what was at the time the national strategies, to work with the SEND policy team, and to work on a project called Achievement for All, which was something that we sort of rolled out across the country and was looking at effective SEND provision in different local authorities. So I did that for a while, then went back into headship for a short while, and then decided to become an independent consultant. That was about 12 years ago now. And when I look back at sort of my early days of being a Senko, it was very, very different then. It was much more sort of operational on the ground. It involved working with sort of small groups of children, delivering interventions, and certainly not the kind of the strategic role that we see it as now. And there was no such thing as the NASENCO or the SEND MPQ. There wasn't any qualifications or anything you had to have then. So it was literally, you just started the job and that was it. You were, kind of expected to just get on with it, really. And there were so many things that I just didn't have a clue about. I was obviously very, very keen to learn. Very sadly, I actually remembered the summer before I started, I went on a girls' holiday to Cyprus, to Ayia Napa, and ended up reading what would it be, 1994 SEN Code of Practice on the beach in Ayia Napa.
What, printed out?
Yeah, hard copy.
Hard copy it would be, wouldn't it? Yeah.
On the beach, yeah.
Nice.
To try and kind of prepare for when I started in September. But think, again, just kind of looking back at that time, there was a particular child that really kind of stands out. It was a child who was actually also in my class at the time. I think I was teaching year 4 at that point. And looking back now, I would say with confidence that the child was autistic. But at the time, although I kind of thought that might be the case, I didn't have the confidence to sort of, even kind of go down that line, really. I didn't know what to do in terms of taking that forward, involving other external agencies necessarily. It wasn't something that anybody had a discussion with the parents about. And I always kind of remember that I just feel like I personally, as a Senko, and us as a school, really failed that child.
Oh, bless you.
Because yes, we put things in place to support him, but I just don't think it was necessarily the most appropriate support for that child.
Yeah.
And as you know, as teachers, as educators, we're here to make a difference. And we can make such a difference, such a positive difference to children in terms of their lives. And there are times when we can really make significant difference to some of our most vulnerable children, including those with SEND, and we want that that difference to be quite positive. And that's kind of really what drives me. And just thinking, I don't want to be in that situation where I'm feeling like I'm failing a child or failing a school in the way that I did back then.
Yeah.
Now in the role that I do, I get to see that kind of wider picture of the challenges that schools and children and parents are facing, but part of which is unfortunately because of the system that we've got at the moment. And I think if I can make a difference, even if it's just a small difference, to try and improve that system, then I will. And I think that's really what drives me.
Yeah, I suppose, and that will help lots more children as well, won't it, if you're doing that? So yeah, it has an even bigger impact.
Hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So your role as an independent education consultant, what does this entail sort of day in, day out then, Natalie?
So it's mainly really about working with schools and with multi-academy trusts to support strategic leadership of SEND. So I might go into a school, for example, and work with the leadership team, with the Senko, to look at kind of strategic planning of SEND. I might go in and work directly with the Senko to support their development of their leadership skills.
Yeah.
I carry out quite a lot of reviews, SEND reviews, both in individual schools and also now across trusts. So I might work with the trust, go and review all of their skills, and then work with the executive team to look at putting together some kind of strategic plan for the whole of the trust. And that's actually quite a significant proportion of my work now, I would say. That's what that sort of work with trusts. I do training, so I do training for Senkos around my Perfect Senko book. I also do training for other head teachers and other leaders, and for teachers as well. I work with, as you sort of previously mentioned, some of the kind of national organisations. So I'm involved in the whole education SEND programme, which is looking at development of SEND leadership across schools, across trusts, and also local authorities. Do a little bit of work for Nasen. I'm an associate for Forum Strategy, so they are an organisation that provides support networking for multi-academy trusts. And again, I deliver MAT SEND reviews through Forum. Again, as you also mentioned, I'm also a trustee for Learn App. So we are a multi-academy trust of 19 primary schools based in and around Leicestershire. So I'm the SEND trustee for Learn App, and have been for about 4 or 5 years now, which is great. I absolutely love that. And it also gives me a little bit of a sort of different perspective on the sort of the world of trust as well. So yeah, that's my role.
I think if anyone doubted me saying at the start that you were SEND royalty, I think now you've just sort of justified it, to be honest, with all of that. You do so many amazing stuff. It's incredible. It really is.
I mean, I'm just lucky, I think, to be able to do.
I don't know
some
about
really
that.
interesting work, you know. So
Yeah. So, and you've also written quite a few books about SEND, The Perfect Senko, The Teacher's Guide to SEN, and you've got another book out, which we'll talk about later. If we talk about the perfect Senko then, because I do love the title, is it possible to be a perfect Senko? Like, and what makes maybe a great Senko then?
okay, well, I think to be honest, the title is slightly tongue-in-cheek because you know, let's face it, nobody's perfect, and I know, you know, neither should we strive to be, really. And I think it's really more about the being able to kind of have an impact,
Yeah,
on the quality of SEND provision across the school, and ultimately have that impact in terms of outcomes for children and young people with SEND. So I think for me, a really great Senko is somebody who is able to have an impact whole school.
yeah.
They are in a position to be sort of strategic, and in a position to be able to, you know, lead and coordinate SEND across the school. You know, the role title is you know, Senko, as in SEN coordinator, not SENDO.
I like that.
And I think that's quite an important sort of distinction to make. Now, obviously, the role of Senko will differ slightly in different schools. But as I say, I think it's predominantly really about providing that sort of strategic direction, working with the senior leadership team to really develop that kind of inclusive vision that the SEND across the school, and coordinate the provision, but then also support other staff in the school to deliver what they need to deliver. Because, as you know, ultimately we talk, don't we, about that idea of, you know, the role of the Senko is almost to do themselves out the job.
Yeah.
Because actually it's really about supporting other staff in the school to be able to fulfill their responsibilities as, you know, as teachers, as support staff, to meet the needs of all pupils. It's interesting, isn't it? We kind of talk in the world of SEN about the idea of every teacher a teacher of SEN. When we refer to the code of practice, it doesn't actually say that, you know, it doesn't use that phrase anywhere in the code of practice. But what it does say is that all teachers are responsible for and accountable for ensuring that pupils with SEN make progress, and that's where that idea of, you know, every teacher a teacher of SEN comes from. It's also about every leader as well, because actually, you know, the leaders are there to set the culture and the ethos and to model the provision. But the Senko in particular is there as that I would say that kind of key advocate, really, for those children, and to ensure that, you know, that the provision in place, whatever that looks like, is really high quality. But just going back to the question about, you know, what makes a really great Senko, for me, to make the difference, it's got to be about leadership, about somebody having that combination, really, of sort of knowledge and understanding of SEND. Because that's, you know, that contextually, that information bit is really important, particularly in terms of things like the law. You know, there's a lot of statutory requirements around SEN. It's important that Senkos know about that. It's important that they, you know, they understand what good teaching and learning looks like for pupils with SEN. But actually, it's also about some of those leadership skills as well, so that they can drive that strategy forward, and they can have that influence on other staff in the school. It's interesting. I was looking at a blog that Gary Orbin wrote, which talks about the you know, should the Senko be part of SLT?
I was reading that this morning,
Yeah,
Natalie. Yeah, I'll put the link to that because we've had Gary on the podcast. So if anyone wants to listen to Gary's podcast as well, I'll put the link to that in the show notes as well as this blog. But yeah, if you want to explain, that blog was really interesting.
it was, wasn't it? And and I think Gary does some really great blogs, and that this was, really kind of gets you sort of thinking. It's called something like Senko's and SLT. Is it really that simple? And he kind of comes from the angle of, many of us will advocate that idea of Senko should be on SLT because they need to be in that position to drive things forward strategically. But actually, he's right. It's not actually that simple. And he talks about his own experience when he first started as a secondary Senko, when he wasn't on SLT, but actually said at that point in time it wasn't appropriate for him to go.
He wasn't ready to be doing that sort of leadership as well. Yeah, I think he mentioned it actually on the podcast as well, his experience, because I presumed he was going to say, I think I asked him actually, if he thought all Senkos should be on SLT, and I was expecting him to say, oh yes, of course, Georgina, and he didn't, and I was like, and then when he was explaining it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes complete sense, because he was like, it doesn't necessarily mean they're ready for that.
No.
It was really interesting. Like they need that help to be able to be strategic and have that overview, but maybe if they've got a champion in SLT or someone to help support that drive, then that can be helpful. But just because they might not be quite ready to be leading the whole school, or they might not have the experience to be leading in the whole school.
And particularly in a large secondary, if you're part of SLT, you end up with lots of other responsibilities as well. And so some people that they might not want that, it might not be appropriate for them to do that. And then when you kind of you look at the sort of other extreme of a very small village school, where actually you may have a total of 4 teachers in your entire school, and if you've already got a head and a deputy, and then there's somebody else who's a Senko, it's not necessarily going to be appropriate for 3/4 of the staff.
I was working out the maths then, like more than half.
That's why I went for 4. It was an easy. I think it does. It's again, it's very contextual. It depends on. I think what one of the things that's quite interesting is the development of different models of SEND leadership. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that at trust level later on, but actually even in individual schools, those models can look quite different.
Yeah, and it's isn't it?
I work with a couple of trusts who have got a lot of small schools. The trust Learn At, the trust where I'm a trustee, we've got a number of small schools as well, where actually we've gone down the road of that shared Senko model, where a couple of schools are sharing one Senko, because it's just more effective and efficient to do it in that way, So it's it's an interesting. I mean, I think going back to what you're saying when you asked Gary that question about should Senkos be on SLT. I mean, I think generally my answer tends to be yes, but it's not it's not as straightforward as that, and there are different contexts, and there are different models that can work really effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we talk as well about your second book before we move on to talk a bit more about working across sort of trusts, etc., and SEND leaders, etc. Your second book was Teacher's Guide to SEN, which is brilliant. Can you just tell our listeners, if they've not got a copy, what it's about?
So hopefully it kind of does what it says on the
tin. We were saying earlier that Natalie's great with titles. The titles just tell you what the book is about. There's no guessing. It's great.
I tend to be a little bit kind of straightforward with things like that. But anyway, so the Teacher's Guide to SEN. The purpose of the book really is for any teacher, any member of staff in school to be able to pick up, just to kind of give that overview of what teachers' roles and responsibilities are in relation to SEN, but also then to give some kind of practical advice. So the book's in 2 parts. Part 1 is all around the inclusive teacher. So it starts by giving a little bit of information on things like the graduated approach. What kind of key key elements within the code of practice that are particularly relevant to teachers. It then goes on to talk about high quality teaching, what that looks like. It gives ideas for teachers in terms of some of the things that they can put in place in relation to high quality teaching. And then the second part of the book goes then into a bit more detail around specific areas of need. Mm-hmm. So it's broken down into four sections, looks at each of the kind of the broad areas of need within the code of practice, and then gives a little bit of information about some of the needs, within that broad area, and then also gives some practical suggestions, tips, guidance for teachers to use in the classroom.
Brilliant. Yeah, really, really useful. So you work with several trusts to support the development of SEND. What are you finding? Because we've had a few podcasts recently on SENCOs with Gary Orvin. We had one with Ginny as well. And I've asked this question to them, and it's interesting to find their answers, and I'm interested to know what you say as well. What are you finding are the main challenges that SENCOs are facing at the moment? And do you have any advice for these SENCOs who will be listening, who are finding the role challenging?
Yes. Okay. So challenges. I would say that probably one of the key challenges that I'm finding at the moment is the overall increase in numbers of children with SEND for a variety of reasons. We know there has been the impact from COVID, but we also know that things like identification has improved and so on. So the overall numbers, if you like, of children with SEND are going up. But I think probably more than that, it's about the increasing complexity of need that a lot of schools are facing. Again, because of things like COVID, for example, but also because of the fact that one of the other key challenges is around the lack of specialist places.
Yes.
And therefore, the mainstream schools, they are finding that they are now educating children who have more and more complex needs.
Yeah.
Some of which different types of needs that they may not have come across before.
Yeah.
It's a whole kind of different ball game. So actually, that's one of the biggest challenges, because it's then about that. We can say. And again, I know many schools where there are children in mainstream schools where you may be saying, well, actually, in the past, this child would have been educated in a special school, and actually, your belief may strongly be that the best place for that child to be educated is in a special school. However, the reality is there are no places. Therefore, we, as mainstream schools, we need to do something to support this child or this group of children. And quite often, where children have got very complex needs, they can have such an impact in terms of how the sort of the amount of resource that schools require to be able to support that child really effectively, particularly in a very small school. If you have one child that comes into reception that's got very, very significant needs, needs a lot of individual support, perhaps just to keep them safe or whatever, that has a major impact on the staffing in a small school. And it's about schools then having to kind of come up with creative ways to really be able to effectively support these children with complex needs. So that's I would say one of the biggest challenges for schools.
I'd agree. That's definitely what I'm hearing and seeing as well.
And then it's about schools, as I say, being creative, but alongside that is a lack of funding.
Yeah, absolutely.
So schools have got to be creative in terms of supporting, educating children with more complex needs, but not necessarily with any additional funding resource that comes with that. So obviously that's an issue.
Yep.
Recruitment of teaching assistants,
yes,
is a massive challenge, because let's face it, it's a difficult job.
It is.
TAs don't get paid enough.
No.
And if as a TA you are working predominantly with one or two children who have complex needs, that can be a very challenging role. Yes, absolutely very rewarding as well, but it can be very challenging. So recruitment of staff who have got, the right skills, attitude, expertise, all the rest of it, schools are really, really struggling with that. Actually, recruitment of Senkos is quite a challenge as well. Again, because it's a difficult, difficult role. And there's a lot of expectation in terms of, kind of qualifications, experience, etc. for that a really great Senko to have, as we've just kind of talked about.
Yeah.
And again, it's it's not a job that everybody wants to do. You've got to absolutely be passionate about it. You can't do that job if you're not fully invested in it. So recruitment of Senkos is a bit of a challenge. Relationships with local authorities.
Yeah.
Also a major challenge. And local authorities have absolutely got challenges of their own. They've got no funding.
A lot of this is linked to funding, isn't it, Natalie? When you talk about systemic change that needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just funding.
No,
it's some people say, everything will be fine if we have more money. That's not the case at all, because it's about a culture. It's about an ethos.
Yeah.
It's about that inclusive ethos actually that really matters. But funding does make a difference. Yeah. And as I say, local authorities don't have any extra money to be giving schools to support them for children with SEND. And also they've got capacity issues. So schools are finding it really difficult to get educational psychology support, speech and language support, OT support, all of those kind of external agencies that previously would have been easier to be able to access. They're just not there. Their caseloads are massive. Huge waiting lists for services such as CAMS, for example. So yes, quite a lot of challenges.
A lot of challenges, which explains why recruitment's tricky for Senkos when they're in that position where their expectations from parents, understandably wanting the best for their children, and then they've got the backdrop of the funding problems and the waiting times, and it's a really difficult job being that middle person, I suppose.
It is, yeah, and I mean, you kind of asked the question about solutions. I mean, I suppose I think one of the if I had all the answers, it'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? I wish I had. Unfortunately, I haven't. But I suppose I think the first thing is about almost a psychological thing about keeping it manageable. Yeah, and being realistic, because there is no such thing as the perfect Senko. You can't do everything. Yeah. You might want to be able to try and solve all of the challenges overnight. That's not going to happen. So I think it's about keeping it manageable. It's about thinking, what is it that we can realistically do within. First of all, that a kind of immediate sort of short term. What is it that we can really plan for long term? Yeah. That we might want to be able to put in place now, but we just know that we can't. Yeah. It's about breaking things down, into small, manageable chunks, like we do for children, when we're teaching. So actually we can see, success along the way. And we don't get to that point where we're just thinking it's all just too overwhelming because there's too
much. And you're never getting there. You're just constantly going around in circles because you're not making that progress.
It's about being able to tick things off your list sometimes, isn't it? Yeah. Sometimes we tick things off, but then we end up adding more than we've ticked off.
I love a tick sheet. I'm all for a tick sheet. It makes me feel good about myself and rewarding myself as well if I achieve them.
I think some of the other things that Senkos can kind of do to support some of the challenges, make sure that you kind of talk to your line manager so that they understand some of those challenges and pressures as well, because actually they don't always. If you're a Senko and your line manager is someone who has never been Senko, they don't necessarily understand the role. It's such a unique role that if you haven't done it, you don't necessarily understand it.
Yeah.
So sometimes it might be a case of kind of sitting down with them and explaining that. Having a kind of a critical friend within your governor, if you have an SEN governor as well, I think can be quite helpful. Just going back to knowing the law, I think that's really important, because where some of the challenges may be around where there have perhaps been disagreements with local authorities around things like EHCPs, for example, or admissions. Actually knowing the law is really helpful, and then you're in a better position to be able to challenge where that's appropriate. But on the other hand, try and where possible to be developing those positive relationships with your local authority.
You don't.
If you get to know some of the key people within the local authority that you can contact and that will respond to you, then actually that can make a huge difference, really. I would also say having really clear systems and structures in place helps. That helps with workload as well. I am a bit of a systems person, but I do think it's really important. When we're thinking about coordination of SEN, just having all the evidence of what we've done, what we've tried, conversations we've had with people, all of that is really important. And to get a consistent approach across the school, those systems and processes really need to be in place.
In your book, Perfect Senko, you've got templates as well, if I remember rightly, haven't you, of like things to help with sort of organisation and that side of things?
I have, there are a couple of things in there from things like sort of checklists for observations and so on. So you might want to have a look at those. So the other thing I would say really important is to remember to think about your own well-being as well. Going back to the oxygen mask.
Fitting your own
mask on first. I think that's really important, because otherwise you're not going to be in a position to be able to to support other people. And I would say from that kind of some of those solutions, certainly around things like workload. You mentioned before about the podcast that you've done with Ginny. She's got some great ideas in the podcast and in her book as well, for things like the workload, but also well-being as well. So I would definitely recommend.
And I will put the link to all the previous Senko podcasts that we've done below, because I think the Ginny one in particular about workload is fantastic. She comes up with different things that you think, but they're really, I don't think they make sense, and you're thinking, why didn't I think of that? Like her things about going, and I think she said about like having meetings off site so you don't get interruptions, and just little things like that, and like, that's common sense. That makes why haven't we thought of that? So I think
very realistic and doable.
Doable, exactly. They're not something huge that you can't manage to achieve. So if we go on to sort of trust and that side of things, I was reading the impact report by the NFER, the National Foundation for Educational Research, and it's called the MAP Factor. It's all over social media at the moment, is this article, isn't it, this research? And that explores how multi-academy trusts are supporting pupils with SEND. And one of the key findings of this MAP was that MAP SEND leaders play a pivotal role in SEND provision. Can you tell us more about this role of a MAP SEND leader then? Is it relatively new, and how do they work with Senkos and individual schools within a MAP? Because there might be Senkos, or there will be Senkos listening there might be a MAP SEND leader as part of their MAP. So it'd be interesting to see how this sort of model works, and what your thoughts on it are.
Well, I think it is relatively new. As a role, when we think about kind of historically the sort of the growth of trust, which is trust, this very start of multi-academy trust wasn't actually that long ago.
No, it wasn't.
And to be honest, I think SEN was not necessarily the first thing that many trusts really thought of when they when they started. So that idea of kind of having someone or a in some cases, a team of people that kind of strategically lead SEND across a trust is definitely still quite new.
Yeah.
And so, in a sense, there's no real sort of blueprint for it. And there are very many different models, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I suppose, generally speaking, the kind of the key role of the sort of the trust SEND lead is really about working with other leaders, including the trust executive team, head teachers, SENCOs across the trust, to develop a joined-up approach to SEND across the trust, and to develop, lead and manage a SEND strategy, so that there is a consistent approach to SEND across all of the schools in the trust, really. And I suppose it's about that, the trust SEND leader having that kind of responsibility for coordinating, monitoring implementation of the strategy across all of the schools in the trust. So, for example, they may be responsible for developing a trust-wide SEND policy, and some of the systems and procedures. They may be directly supporting head teachers and SENCOs to deliver the SEND strategy at a sort of school level. They're likely to be providing expert advice around things like provision, teaching and learning, things like sort of legal frameworks, etc. They may be supporting effective deployment of resources, SEND resources across the trust as well. They may be responsible for things like commissioning external support at a trust level, and that's something that I know a lot of trusts are either already started doing or are now looking into, because of the challenges around for schools actually finding people that they can use, and so a lot of trusts are going down that line now. They may be contributing to kind of curriculum development across the trust, supporting that kind of whole school high quality teaching approach, for example. And I think probably quite critically, one of the key things that they will be doing is providing that direct support and guidance to SENCOs. And as I just mentioned, there are lots of different models of MAT SEND leadership around. So you've got some trusts, particularly larger trusts, that have got maybe one person or a team of people who work across the trust. They're part of the executive team, and that is their role. They do that probably on a kind of full-time basis. Then you get trusts where the MAT SEND leader might also have trust responsibility for other elements, such as safeguarding or inclusion in a kind of broader sense. You've got trusts where you may have somebody who is working within one of the schools within the trust, who also, as part of their role, takes on that responsibility. It might be a leading SENCO, it might be a head teacher. So part of their time, they're actually looking at that kind of role across the trust. And so some trusts have gone down the kind of the SENCO hub model as well, where they've got a number of people kind of across different geographical regions who are kind of got an element of leading. So there lots of lots of different models.
A bit like the sort of the SENCO in the sense, and the different models you're going to have, like you're saying, in small schools compared to big secondary schools. It's going to look different. It's going to look different depending on the context. Absolutely. We recently spoke to Gary Orbin, I keep mentioning his name, he'll like that, about the reasoning behind the title of his book, The Lone SENCO. Do you reckon the model of this sort of MAT SEND leaders thing could help SENCOs feel less isolated? Could it help with the lone SENCO?
Oh, definitely. And I think you mentioned before about the NFER report, the MAT factor, and that was one of the key findings that they found when they spoke to I think it was about SENCOs and other staff from about 90 different trusts. This was one of the kind of the key things that they said, was actually that those SENCOs who were part of a trust said that they did feel much more supported,
Yeah,
because they've got that network,
yeah.
and they've got somebody who drives that forward.
And they've got someone else, I suppose, to sort of back up. It's not all on your shoulders, is it, if you've got someone else?
That's it. Because it is, as you said, it's a lonely role, and other people, if they've not done it, don't necessarily know what it entails. So if you've got a question, and actually it's quite a specific specialist question, who is it that you go to?
Yeah.
It may not be anybody else in your school that would necessarily be able to help you with that. Well, actually, if you've got somebody in your trust that you can go to, and I think sometimes it's almost that so it's partly reassurance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think one of the trusts I work with got schools across Northamptonshire and Peterborough and Rutland, and one of the things that I've done with them for a number of years now is just to kind of be the person on the end of the phone if Senkos or heads just need to ask kind of question. It's usually around individual pupils, EHCPs, local authorities, that kind of thing. But I would say 9 times out of 10 that they'll ring me up, they'll ask a question, and they'll say, I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing, I'm doing this and this, is that right? And actually they're doing absolutely everything that they can. There's nothing else that I can add, but actually it's just a little bit of reassurance that they are doing the right thing, particularly when the law is involved as well. Yes. Again, that adds that extra element of pressure and accountability.
That's really helpful, being able to recall you. You're a bit like sort of an SEND Alexa, really, then. I can just ask you. I use Alexa just to check, like, I don't know, the kids bring home homework, and I'm like, I think I know the answer, just 1 second, let me just double check with my assistant here, Alexa. You're a bit like that, then. They can pick up the phone. Yeah. They can pick up the phone and ask you some questions, and just they think they probably do know, or they probably do know already, but just to get that sort of backup and not feel so isolated and have the huge weight of responsibility on their shoulders, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also about workload, isn't it? Yeah. Because again, where you've got, as a trust, where you've got sort of shared resources, even things like templates, forms, we know, there's loads of paperwork involved in SEN.
Yeah.
So actually having kind of standardized templates and things across the trust that you can just pick up and use, it's massive for kind of workload, really.
Yeah. Are there any downsides then to the sort of model for SEN provision? Are the schools are the Senkos still able to have like autonomy and sort of that side of things, or is that not an issue?
Well, I mean, I think it's a good point. I think it can be. I mean, I think there are advantages and disadvantages as opposed to kind of all systems, really, aren't there? And I think it's not necessarily always a case of it's going to be different if we're part of a map to not being part of a map.
Yeah.
Because it depends on the map,
Absolutely, there's a lot.
Just in the way that there's always, since the development of multi-academy trust, the debate about, is it better to be a trust school? Is it better to be a local authority school? Well, actually, there isn't one answer to that. No. Because local authority schools can be good or not great. Actually, so can trusts, and actually, most of it depends on the quality of the leadership. Whether you're a local authority school, whether you're a trust school, it's predominantly about the leadership. So I think as I say, it's more really about the individual trust, and there's always, I think, that fine balance across a trust in terms of the kind of the direction versus the autonomy. And to what extent do you want consistency across the trust? And where you do want consistency, does that require you to be more directive? Because sometimes it might be. And that's certainly understandable in larger trusts where you've got, where you might have, 40 odd schools, and actually to get that consistency, actually perhaps you might need a little bit more direction. So that, there can be a little bit of tension there. And again, going back to the NFBR report, that was something that they brought up within that report. Some Senco's had said that they felt a little bit constrained sometimes because of that direction. But it's about getting that balance. I think one of the other challenges is where you've got trusts that have schools that go across different local authorities, because it's also then about getting the balance in terms of what we want as a trust, and actually where there's specific local direction, because obviously local authorities work in different ways. So you might, as a trust, you might want to say, well, this is the process we're going to use, or these are the forms that we're going to use to collect evidence for provision mapping, for example. But then some local authorities might be, even though they can't legally, insisting that, if you want to go for a top-up quarantine or for an EHC needs assessment, that actually you've got to produce evidence in a particular form. And as I say, legally they can't insist. However, it makes it more challenging and difficult for schools if they're not jumping through some of those hoops that local authorities sometimes put in place for understandable reasons. So I think that kind of locally driven agenda can sometimes be slightly at odds to the trust driven agenda, particularly where you've got a trust that goes across different local authorities.
Yeah, that sounds complicated, doesn't it? Really complicated and difficult to manage. I'm aware I'm using lots of your time up. So if we go on to your book, so you've written another book, your third book, which is that your third book? Is that correct?
It is, yes.
Which you've written with David Bartram, and it links very nicely to what we've been talking about. So the book is out now, but as we're recording this, it's not out. So, but people listening, it is out. That makes sense. But the title we're not 100% sure on. Is that correct, Natalie? You think you know what the subtitle is going to be, but I'm going to put the link to this book in the show notes for you to have a look. And this might make people tempted to look so they can find out the title. This might be a brilliant marketing strategy here, Natalie. Do you want to tell us about this book and who it's for, etc.?
Yes, so we're still in kind of conversations about the actual title, but it's about leading great SEND provision across a trust. That was going to be the title, but it might be slightly different by the time the book actually comes out. But essentially, that's what it's about: leading great SEND provision across a trust. And the reason that David and I decided to write this book was because of the fact that, as just mentioned, that the whole kind of role of the trust SEND leader is relatively new, and there is no blueprint. And at the time of recording, there isn't really yet anything else out there. I think it was really interesting when the NFER report came out, which again at time of recording was actually just a week or so ago. And because that's really the first thing that's been published, which looks specifically at SEND across trust and some of the challenges, and actually talks specifically about the role of the MAT SEND leader as well. There isn't really a lot else out there. So that's why we decided we wanted to write it. And we're not just to kind of say at this point, we're not suggesting that we're the experts on this by any means. But what we've done is to put together a number of different pieces, articles, case studies, contributions from other people. So from people who are doing that role of as a trust SEND lead. We've got contributions from trust CEOs. We've got contributions from kind of other consultants that work directly with trusts as well. And so essentially it's a series of kind of case studies that look at different elements of leading SEND across a trust. Now, it's not just for trust SEND leaders, it's for other trust leaders, CEOs, heads of education, etc., and also people who might have some responsibility for leading SEND across federations or other groups of schools will hopefully also find it quite useful as well. But it's predominantly been written with the trust SEND leader in mind. So we it is very much focused on leadership. We're using something called the Pendleton's primary colours model of leadership, which kind of gives a structure that enables us to focus on particular elements of leadership. So it talks about things like strategy, leading teams, developing relationships, planning and organising. So a lot of the key elements that are really important to leadership of SEND, be that across a school or a trust. And then, as I say, we've then kind of got these really great examples from lots of trust leaders, just to really bring it to life, and it's kind of a starting point in terms of sharing some of the good practice, that's already out there. And David and I, between us, have worked with quite a number of trusts. We've done quite a lot of trust SEND reviews, so we've got a bit of an overview. Some of the challenges, some of the solutions, but also through that we've been able to make contact with and network with so many people who are doing some really great things across trusts at the moment. So the idea of the book is really just to bring all of that together.
It sounds brilliant. And just before you go, let's tell us, where can people find your books and how can they follow you on social media? And I will put links to your books in the show notes, so people listening, if you scroll down on your phone or your computer, you'll see them below, or if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see it down here. So where can they find your books and where can they follow you on social media?
Okay, so the books all available on Amazon. Fairly easy. And if you want to follow me on social media, predominantly use X, formerly known as Twitter, and I am my handle is @Natalie Packer.
That's nice and easy, Natalie. I like that. Nice and simple. Brilliant. Thank you ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
How lucky was I getting to speak to Natalie Packer? Make sure you have a look at all of her books and her work, in particular her latest book, which I can confirm is out now. And the title is very similar to what she said. It's Beyond Boundaries, Leading Great SEND Provision Across a Trust. And that's available to buy now. And have a look at all of our resources that we've linked to this episode as well in the show notes. And make sure you subscribe to our channel. And thanks again for listening to Sending the Experts with me, Georgina Durrant. See you next time.